Coach Steven, I'm so glad to have you on my channel today. There's a lot of noise right now, with people leaving carnivore and adding in carbs. Maybe they are making some decisions based off of wrong information.
This is all public record, and they came up with the term pre-diabetes 2016. They looked at 103 different studies where people were pre-diabetic, and virtually none of those people became diabetic.
Coach Steven, I'm so glad to have you on my channel today. I feel like you are going to make people feel a little bit better, have some reassurance, because there's a lot of noise right now, with people leaving carnivore and adding in carbs. And we were talking, you think maybe they are making some decisions based off of wrong information as far as like labs and stuff. And again, we don't want to discredit anybody what they're doing. If they feel better adding carbs, that's great. But we're going to get into it because, thyroid, testosterone, all that, people are saying that carnivore is tanking their hormones. So let's get into it. Teach us, please.
Yes. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm going to just double down on what you just said. If people want to eat whatever they want to eat and they feel better, I'm not going to deny their experience. But my biggest problem is people making decisions where they've heard an influencer and it seems to make total sense, but actually, as soon as you scratch the surface, it doesn't make any sense. And the biggest one is the A1C, or hemoglobin A1C, as we say in the UK, which is the adult 1C hemoglobin in your red blood cells. And I've got to the point where I think people need to understand exactly how that measurement is collected and why it is unreliable. So I'll give you a little bit of history first. So 16 years ago, when I started with hematology and phlebotomy, we were told that one of the things that we need to look out for is an HbA1c, which is artificially low. So this is all known. This is not controversial whatsoever. And that's because some people have red blood cells that don't live as long as the lab is expecting. So the lab does not look at the red blood cell lifespan when it measures your HbA1c. It just looks at the glycation. So I've made a little sort of red blood cell to illustrate this point and explain really how the measurement is taken. And I think people will understand straight away. That makes total sense. I understand it. Okay, so a red blood cell is assumed to live for 120 days. And just to keep the maths really easy, I've got some glycated hemoglobin on here. And what it represents is 10 days worth of glycation each one. So every single day, just to make the maths easy, let's imagine that one hemoglobin is being glycated. And I will explain the process of glycation in a minute, but let's just get the numbers done. So after 120 days, you get 12 of these, which represents 120 hemoglobins being glycated one a day for 120 days. So there's a thing called an HPLC, which is a high performance liquid chromatography device. This goes into a column and it's got a certain charge. Okay, don't worry about the science, Courtney. It makes total sense. I promise you. Don't worry. Don't glaze over. So it'll go into this column and it will stay in this column for a particular amount of time based on its charge, and it will go off, and then the next one will go through, and we'll get the reading. Here it comes, how easy this is. We'll get the reading that the red blood cells are glycated to a score of 120. And what they do is they get the score of 120 and they divide it by 120 days, and your HbA1c is 1. Now, doesn't that sound great? Right. Easy so far?
Okay,
right,
I'm following. Yes.
Cool. Right. Well, that's the point, because many people are talking about it and they don't even know why it is a problem. Right, so let's do the next thing. I'm going to show you a different one now. Look at this one. That's not very glycated. But this is the red blood cell of someone who's got a condition called hemolytic anemia, which is a posh way of saying your red blood cells don't last very long. And we're going to assume it's 60 days. Okay. So what's happened is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hemoglobins have been glycated. And obviously, if that red blood cell then died, it wouldn't be in the blood, so you wouldn't be able to test it. But the ones that survive for 60 days, they go into the column, they go to a different part because there's a different charge, slightly less charge. It goes off. This happens again, and you get the number 60. But the lab will then divide 60 by 120, and you get 0.5. And that's your HbA1c reading. That's it being artificially low. So you'd have to say to somebody, and obviously we've got eyes, you can tell some people are diabetic, you'd have to say to the person with hemolytic anemia, we're going to do a reticulocyte count, which is the count to see how many red blood cells your body is actually making. And if it's very high, it means your bone marrow is working overtime to make lots of extra red blood cells. Now, when I started about 6 years ago doing carnivore coaching, very, very much, on a sort of daily basis, I had a lot of people with CGMs, continual glucose monitors, saying my HbA1c doesn't match my CGM. So we started looking at the fact that, well, if you can get an artificially low reading, can you get an artificially high one? And yet it turns out it's exactly what happens. The reticulocyte count absolutely plummets, the HbA1c goes up proportionately, and it proves that red blood cells are living longer, which is a good sign. But the problem is, if you've got a red blood cell, and this is the worst one you'll see, this is 150 days it's been in the system. So you've got 15 of these, okay? And that goes into the column. It stays at the top because the charge is really high because there's a lot of glycation. Off that goes 150, but they don't measure the red blood cell life. So they take 150 divided by 120 and you get a score of 1.25. So all of a sudden, even with the same glycation rate, you can have 0.5, 1, 1.25. It's all dependent on the red blood cell life. Now, I've heard one influencer say that that is BS. No, that's a fact, and I deal in facts. And there is even labs now looking at what's called HbA1c. I think you had a guest on a couple of weeks ago mentioned it. I've been talking about this for a long time, which is called the adjusted HbA1c, where the HPLC machine will then look at the red blood cell life as well and give you a proper HbA1c reading. And that, I think, is one of the big reasons why people are worrying, because they see their A1C going up and they are being told, oh, I'm now pre-diabetic. And that's not true. It's actually that the reading is not fit for purpose. So that's the first thing. And I find that is one of the biggest things that is getting me down, because people just poo-poo it. They just say it's BS, or, it's measuring glycation. Yes, it's measuring glycation, but the number you're being given is not correct. So that's the first thing. And then there is the other thing where we talk about pre-diabetes. Now, pre-diabetes, and I've been around a long time. I've been a specialist practitioner in obesity and diabetes for 16 years. So I can remember this. In 2001, Richard Kahn, who was the scientific director at the American Diabetes Association, who has since regretted making this decision, they were worried about doctors. Yes, doctors, not patients. Doctors not being scared enough about the tsunami of diabetics. So they had a meeting at the National Institute of Health in 2001 in the cafeteria to come up with a phrase, not a medical thing, a phrase to scare doctors out of their complacency. This is all public record. And they came up with the term pre-diabetes. So people aren't pre-diabetic. In fact, the Cochrane report, which was done, I think, in 2019, could be 2016, they looked at 103 different studies where people were pre-diabetic, and virtually none of those people became diabetic. So a lot of confusion about the numbers. So I've been studious. I love the people that, some of the people that have turned their back on carnivore. I've reached out to them. They don't want to know. They don't want to debate. I asked Robert Cyrus a few times in the comments, I'd love to debate you on this, not heard. Robert Kiltz is eating potatoes, being more inclusive. Love him to bits. So this is not personal, but I think the average person who's listening to the influencers, and Lisa Wilderman as well, another one I absolutely love, met her at MeetRx 6 years ago. But I would like to speak to those people, because I don't want them making decisions based on science that's been interpreted wrong, or numbers that have been interpreted wrong. So this thing about, my blood glucose is over 100. Right, well, that's arbitrary. Again, that's another thing. Where does that come from? It's got to be under 100. In this way of eating, our physiology is different. We're having less carbohydrates. Now, there are insulin receptors in our body, or glucose transporters. There are 14. Only one is insulin dependent, and that's the GLUT4. All the rest don't need insulin. So when you have low insulin, we're dealing with what's called glucose diffusion, passive diffusion. So the glucose isn't being forced into the cells, it's in residence in the bloodstream. So even being over 100, and when we again look at the science, and I've done this, I've been in labs to look at different things. There are known thresholds where things happen. So before we had blood testing, we used to have doctors' assistants drinking urine to see if it tasted sweet. And that was how they did, right.
I promise it's not, but it looks like it.
And that's how they would diagnose diabetes. So it's sugar urine. Diabetes mellitus is literally Greek and Latin for passing through honey-flavored piss. I mean, that's basically what it is, right? Well, that renal threshold is 180 milligrams per deciliter. I'm not saying people should be aiming to get to that. So that's the first thing. That's way past 100. And there is another threshold, which in Britain, I know off the top of my head, is 7 millimoles per litre, which is about 127 milligrams per deciliter. And that's when we have a thing called the polyol pathway coming in to take glucose out of the bloodstream. So there are two triggers where that's quite high, and maybe we don't want to get higher than that. So 127 milligrams per deciliter, don't want to be above that very much because the polyol pathway comes in. We know that this is a problem in diabetics over that level, and we know the mechanism. We know what causes cataract. So none of what I'm saying is theory. These are known mechanisms. So when you get over that consistently, what happens is that glucose is taken out of your bloodstream, converted to sorbitol, which when it enters your eye is an osmotic compound, which is a flash word for saying it sucks up water, and it sucks up water and your lens becomes opaque, which is a cataract. So we know these things, right? None of what I'm saying so far is controversial. So we've got 127, we've got 180. Don't want to be in those areas whatsoever. And we don't need tons of insulin because we're not eating lots of carbohydrates and we're not above those levels. Our insulin is appropriate. So when people say your insulin suppressed, no, that's if they're looking at the normative ranges in bloods. The normative ranges, and we will talk about the thyroid as well, we'll talk about testosterone, are not optimal ranges. And once people get that into the head as well, it'll make a big difference because these ranges are based on people eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates. I don't know about you, but I never touch 45 to 65% carbohydrates. I'm different. So my insulin will be lower. Now, if you're insulin suppressed, what are the clinical things you'd expect if someone has low insulin? Well, we know that you waste away. Now, many people are saying, well, I'm putting on weight. I'm really worried about this insulin suppression. Well, you can't have those two things. We know this. In 1922, when insulin was discovered and we were able to inject people with insulin, and we didn't know at that point that there were different types of diabetes, there were some people with type 1 diabetes where they don't make enough insulin. So we could sort of theoretically say, well, they're insulin suppressed. They could eat 10,000 calories a day and not put on any weight. They would die of malnutrition. So this miracle thing that they discovered called insulin, you'd inject into these people and they wouldn't waste away. So we know that if you're insulin suppressed, which isn't a thing, by the way, but we use that terminology, you would be wasting away. So if anyone's thinking they're insulin suppressed and they're putting on weight, those two things don't go together because low levels of insulin mean that you can burn up fat. We know this because that's what most people low carb and keto have been doing. Oh, I'm keeping my insulin low because I want to be a fat burner. So we know that's true. Guyton's medical physiology textbook. Yeah, lots of science. Sorry, Courtney, but we don't want to do that. But it's in there. This is the textbook that doctors in the UK refer to all the time. It literally has a paragraph that sums up weight loss, which says that fat metabolism is greatly enhanced in the absence of insulin. This is all physiology. So the absence of insulin will mean that you will not gain weight. So another checkbox there. If you're gaining weight and you're thinking you're insulin suppressed, those two things don't go together. So why would you add carbs? Bump up your insulin. That's what the argument seems to be. And that makes no sense either, because what you'd be doing is you will be increasing glycation in your body. Well, I thought we wasn't, too worried about the glycation, or are we? It's all very confused. So we go back to this. People are worried about glycation, and yet they're putting the very substance into their body that glycates. The posh thing about glycation is it's a bond, all right? So it's the carbonyl group in the glucose molecule. It attaches to the nitrogen in the protein, all right? So these hemoglobins have protein. It has nitrogen in. Glucose bobs past, it goes, oh, I want to attach to that. That's what glycation is. It's really simple, but it isn't just hemoglobin. It's every protein in your body. So collagen. So if you start eating carbohydrates, you will get glycated collagen. That will happen, absolutely happen. And they will link. It's an irreversible bond. You can't actually stop this. Once it's done, it's done. So you will age because you'll have more glycation, because collagen will be glycated. So your albumin, which is the most abundant protein that transfers stuff around in your body, that will be deranged because that will be glycated. So you might have a temporary, I feel better. And that's possibly because when you start eating carbohydrates, you get a little bit of water retention, which will help with your fluid balance and your electrolyte balance, because maybe you've been under eating. And you will also see your addictive nature being a bit happier because your dopamine is getting those dopamine hits. So if you were someone that was pushing themselves to be talking about carb addiction, the last thing you should be doing is getting people to eat carbs, because that's a sticky slope to get onto, because once you start, it's a bit like glycation. You go up and it's very difficult to go back down again. because once you've started eating the carbs, you will eat more and more. So someone like Paul Saladino, who I love, no one I love, none of this is personal. You see, it goes from 50 to 100, 200 grams of carbs. Really, really simple. Now, if you're surfing 4 hours a day, you might get away with it. But you see, I think he's aged because of all the glucose. Now, you asked me to talk, but I'm quite happy to shut up if you've got questions. But did that help you in any way?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes a little more sense for me. I'm curious then. Okay, well, I have a few questions. So, the A1C, people are saying, oh, their A1C like went up to 6 and they didn't feel comfortable with that. So, you're saying that's not even a thing then?
No,
Like,
because if they do a reticulocyte count, they will realize their red blood cells are lasting longer. Now, that should be a little clue as to what we're doing is really good. The body doesn't want to break stuff down and make it up all the time. So if your red blood cells are living longer, and it's not the glycation that makes the blood red blood cell actually viable, which is proven with this, by the way. So the red blood cells have to be what's called deformable, so they get into small spaces and into little vessels. So in the spleen, there's a bit like a Disney ride. If you're bigger than this, you can't ride. So basically, once those red blood cells can't do their little tricks, it's recycled. Well, this way of living is showing that they live longer. So if you're worried about that, if you're not comfortable with 6, it's because you don't understand the reading, because the 6 is not telling you anything. It's actually an artifact of the maths. So going back to that thing where it was, 60 or 120, 150, it was the same glycation rate, but it was the life of the blood cell that made the difference. So what we need to do is do a different test, like the fructosamine test, which only looks at a 3-week lifespan. And I tell you what, literally everybody that has worried that I've dealt with that's had a fructosamine test, in fact, what's actually happening is your glycation rate is lower than the HbA1c, as said. So if you don't feel comfortable at 6, at least understand the number, why that number might be wrong.
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, then what about, because you're talking about the glucose, what if, carnivores that were having, their glucose around like 100 or whatever, they weren't comfortable with that and they added carbs back in and now they're saying that their glucose is lower. Like they're showing their tests and it's like, "Oh, I have 8, it's at 80." So how is that working then?
Well, they're eating more glucose, and the body realizes that higher levels of glucose. So, firstly, they're worried about high levels of glucose, and they're adding glucose. Well, how does that work? Right. Well, how that works is the body is realizing that that's pretty toxic, so it's producing more insulin. You're actually putting your insulin up. Now, this is where the homeostatic part of the equation comes in, because many people talk about cortisol as a stress hormone. It's not. It's a homeostatic hormone. It's not that at all. You can have someone with 100 as an average, and you can have two completely different people walk in, and their average will both be 100. But one's got blood glucose going up to 150, down to 50, up to 150, down to 50, 150. But the average is 100. Or you can have someone doing carnivore, for instance, 105, 95, 105, 95, 105, 95. I know where I'd rather be.
Yeah.
I don't want all those excursions. And what they're not looking at is what's happening in the background to give them those lower numbers. Well, the answer is bucket loads of insulin, because your body is worried about the homeostasis of your body. So it's pushing it down lower. And this is one of the reasons why when people start going back on the carbs, or remember before they did this way of eating, they used to eat carbs, they'd have their breakfast, they'd have their sugar high, and insulin would do its biphasic response, because there's insulin always in the system. You get a granular response, then you get another response based on how toxic that carbohydrate level is, or blood glucose level is, and it will bring it down quickly, and then you get the sugar crash and you want to eat again. Well, they're going back to that. I'm just going to say this because it's quite strange. They're worried about 100 milligrams per deciliter. But if you look at 50 grams of carbs and you put 50 grams of carbs into 5 liters of blood, that would be 1,000 milligrams per deciliter. That's really shocking. That's what you're doing with just 50 grams of carbs. You're potentially, it won't happen because the body has these ways of dealing with it. But it's a huge amount of carbohydrate, a huge amount of glycation, and a huge amount of insulin, which you just don't want to do.
That's so interesting. So, and this is actually, yeah, it's clicking for me. And
Mhm.
so it almost seems like they're chasing the wrong numbers in, or they're so worried about those two numbers and not realizing what their body is doing to get there, to make
Yeah.
those numbers lower or whatever.
Exactly. You got it straight away. Now imagine you had a continual insulin monitor. None of this would happen. None of it. Now everybody is talking about insulin resistance, which is actually a misnomer, but everyone's worried about high insulin. And yet here we are, gaming numbers, thinking, well, my blood glucose looks great. You know, the biggest problem with type 2 diabetics is we didn't know what their insulin was 20 years ago. We know this. We know that if we knew the insulin numbers, we could stop people becoming type 2 diabetic, because that's the kicker. How big is that insulin spike going to go to give you the numbers that you want? And it's gaming numbers, but not actually looking at the science of it. Surely everyone can see if you want to lower your blood glucose, the last thing you want to do is add glucose to it, because your body's got to deal with it. Let's get into the homeostatic range that physiologically is appropriate for human beings that aren't eating lots of carbohydrates. And I'll tell you, it's probably about 100, 110. That's looking at actual lab results. And believe it or not, one of the studies I've got was done by the American Diabetes Association. Now, they don't want you to have high numbers. They really want you to have low numbers so they can sell you some medications. And even they are saying 90 to 130 is fully acceptable. And that's in black and white for the American Diabetes Association. That's hard to find, but I can send you links to that as well. That the point you got amazingly quickly, which I'm really pleased about, is they're gaming the numbers. They're not understanding the physiology. They're being told this number's really bad. Okay, why is it really bad? Well, because in the context of all these normal ranges, it's really bad. Yeah, but are these people that gave you the blood to get these normal ranges, are they optimal? No, they're not. Are they eating carnivore? They're eating keto? No. Well, no, they're not doing that either. They're eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates. Well, yeah, of course they're going to have a lot of insulin. So that range for insulin, 2 to 20 in the UK, is based on people eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates. Now, there are so many other examples I can give you. I feel like we're sort of flogging a dead horse here on the glucose and the insulin. But I can give you other examples if you want to talk about thyroid. Practical, real examples, real people, okay? So I had somebody come to me, I'm really worried, I've got subclinical TSH. Really? Okay. Now, the biggest thing you learn when you do phlebotomy, and all doctors learn this, is when someone walks in, you look at them. And really, that's your first diagnosis. It's like, okay, they look pretty good, lean or whatever, quite energetic, bright eyes. You know, nowadays, they don't ask you to stick your tongue out because tongues are so horrible for most people. There's no point. That's really genuine, actually. So anyway, so this guy contacted me and he said, I've got 4 years of data and I'm getting fed up with my doctor saying I'm subclinical with TSH. I said, well, how are you feeling? Oh, great. Since I've been carnivore, it's been fantastic. Carnivore 5 years. Okay. Body composition, great. Sleep, anxiety, everything, all great. So we looked at his numbers. And I spoke to Amber O'Hearn about this, and she really liked it because his TSH was subclinical, right? But his T4 production was pretty much on the money. So was his T3. That was great. T3 is always a little bit lower because you don't need so much. And this is a big thing I want to say actually about T3. We'll go off. We'll come back to our guy. One of the things that gets on my nerves is people saying gluconeogenesis is stressful, but I want to increase my T3 because it's tanked. Do you know what T3 does? It stimulates gluconeogenesis. So you're saying on the one hand, I'm relying on gluconeogenesis, that's stressful, but one of the thyroid hormones that's really low, I'd like higher. And that's how one of the functions. When we talk about thyroid, it is the metabolic mastermind. That's how it is. The T3 puts up your gluconeogenesis. That's partly what it does. So it's, again, not joined up thinking. So anyway, going back to the guy. So he's got the subclinical for 4 years, great data. I'm really lucky. Because I'm dealing with bloods for a lot, I get people with great data. So we're looking at his T3. That's fine. Look at his clinical presentation. Looking at his T4 and his TSH, even his antibodies, everything. And I said, right, okay. So for 4 years, you've been told it's subclinical, but you're fine. Let's imagine you're the first person that ever came in to have a blood test. And I was the guy that did the ranges. And I looked at you and I listened to your clinical experience and I looked at the levels of T3 and T4. I would conclude that your TSH is perfect. It must be. And this is the thinking that we've got to do. We've got to look at the ranges and say, they're not relevant. In many cases, they're not relevant. T3 is a classic one, by the way, because T3, you need a lot more T3 when you're eating carbs because T3 is a critical part of glycolysis, the breaking down of carbohydrates. It moves pyruvate across into the mitochondrial membrane. Forget the science, all right? Because I know that's not what your channel is about. But the basics is you need T3 to eat carbs and metabolize them. So do you know what? If you're not eating carbs and metabolizing carbs, you don't need so much T3. So T3 isn't tanked. It is appropriate. So if you're changing because of your numbers, if you're changing because of your A1C, it's probably wrong. You need to do fructosamine. If you're changing because you're worried it's 105, then you need to do a little bit of research on what a physiological decent range is for someone that's eating a very small amount of carbohydrates, because that's not problematic. If you're changing because your T3 is low, because it's tanked, then that's not good. And then you get into the antibodies, which I snuck in there. And by the way, T2 is so underestimated, you wouldn't believe. We can't measure T2 because it's really not in the blood very long. That's why people don't talk about it, because they can't do some content about it. But our T2 production is absolutely critical as well. T2 works on the electron transport chain. I'm trying not to get all sciencey, sorry, Courtney, but your energy production is ramped up with T2. So when you go on carnivore, what happens in the thyroid is you have the raw materials to make your thyroid work fantastically, because that's what's been lacking. So many women say, I went on carnivore or I went keto and I've now got my cycle back, all these sort of things, or they were continually cold or too hot, or unexplained weight gain, unexplained weight loss. I'm really big into the clinical presentation of these people, because that's what really matters. Well, when they start eating this way, your thyroid production goes up. So the things inside your follicular cell, the functional unit of the thyroid, which is TPO, thyroid peroxidase, and thyroglobulin, that's two major players, they have antibodies. Now, your immune system is always working. In fact, everything we've just talked about is always working. Cortisol is always working. Gluconeogenesis is always working. Whether you are vegan, vegetarian, standard American diet, carnivore, keto, don't matter. This is physiology. You know, if you went abroad and had to have some surgery, the surgeon wouldn't open you up and go, right, how does this one work? We all work pretty much the same. All right. So when your body produces antibodies against TPO and TG, that's normal. That's what I call checks and balances. It's constantly checking in. Now, what happens is it's proportionate. So just to make this really easy, let's say you've got an army and you've got 1,000 people, right? 1,000 soldiers, and you want to drill them and make sure they're looking smart. And you've got one drill sergeant that walks along and, okay, right, I've done all my checks and balances. That's great. And then somebody comes along and says, right, I'm dumping another 1,000 soldiers in. Well, the drill sergeant will have to say, well, could I have another drill sergeant? Well, that makes sense. Of course it does. Right. So when you start producing more thyroid hormone, you have slightly more antibodies. So it's all about the proportion. And I have people saying, oh, my antibodies have gone up. And I'm like, yeah, but when we plot a graph of all your production, your T3, T4 or whatever, it was there and your antibodies were here. And now it's up here, your T3 and T4, and your antibodies are up a little bit, because it's doing more checks and balances. And it's that sort of little nuance, and also understanding that there's a lot of stuff being said that isn't true. So cortisol keeps getting blamed. Glucagon is the thing that pushes blood glucose up the most. I mean, if you look at Professor Bing Bickman, he's always talking about the insulin and glucagon ratios. And this is where not eating enough protein becomes a problem, where or not eating enough, because people are saying, oh, you're not spiking your insulin enough, or you're not stimulating GLP-1. Well, yeah, you do that with protein, but as long as you're eating enough, you're going to get the response that you want. Sorry, I'm going to stop now because you look like you want to jump in there.
No, I feel like that was all good. And so I guess it's more than like if things are lowering, it's not necessarily like it's dysfunction. It's just
Adaptation.
adapting.
Yeah,
Okay.
physiological adaptation. Just take it the other way. Let's say you chucked out meat from your diet completely and you went high carb. Do you think all your numbers would stay the same?
No.
No, they'd change.
Yeah.
And you'd have to understand the context. So let's say your insulin went from 2 to 20 in 3 months, and you came to me and said, whoa, what's happening? I say, well, because you've cut the meat out and you put carbs back in. Okay, simple as that. Oh, my T3's gone up. Well, yeah, because you're eating more carbs. And I'd say, how do you feel, Courtney? And you go, I feel like crap. So I think that's the thing that has bothered me more, is because it literally is misinformation. It is misinformation. So there are many things being said. I'll just explain the protein thing. So I've been really lucky to be in some really good research labs and speaking to some really good biotech people. And I've done experiments on myself. So when you eat protein, there's an old thing, well, steak becomes cake. Well, that doesn't happen. Well, what you see on a CGM, if you've got a really nuanced, good one, it's calibrated really finely, you will see that when you eat protein, your blood glucose actually drops before it goes up. And this makes total sense as well. And this is why people say you need to eat enough protein if you want to be healthy. When many people talk about Paul Saladino, he was probably having too much organ meat and not enough protein in one sitting or whatever, but the process of the protein will elicit CKK, cholecystokinin, or CCK, sorry. So when you eat protein, you need 5 times the amount of energy to digest it compared to carbs. And your body picks that straight up. You eat a lot of protein, your body will sense that it's protein that's being digested, and it will send a message via cholecystokinin to the pancreas, and it will tell the pancreas to produce glucagon, which will put your blood glucose up. So that's what you see. When you eat a lot of protein, you see the body going, we need more energy to digest it. So you need to eat enough protein. And of course, what will happen? That will stimulate insulin. So everything's hunky-dory if you're eating enough. So I think many of these people might have actually been under-eating, which actually can make you gain weight because your body lowers its metabolic rate because it's detecting scarcity. And then once they put the carbs back in, we know that when you eat carbs, your satiety signals fall down a bit. Because everyone says, oh, I can eat carbs till the cows come home. And we know that from the Minnesota prison experiment. You can eat 10 times as much when your diet is predominantly carbs than you can over proteins and fats. You start eating carbohydrates, you're going to be eating a bigger volume of food. And that is odd that the body then ramps up your metabolic rate and you actually lose a bit of weight because you're now eating what you should be, the right amount.
That's interesting. So I'm curious though, for those that were having symptoms and now they feel better with the carbs, I know you mentioned protein. Is it just that, or do you think it's also something with the fat? Like maybe like the macros weren't good. Like the whole like fat threshold. So do you think we should be like a little bit leaner on
Yeah.
carnivore, or what are your thoughts on that then?
Well, everyone's very different, aren't they? So I'm sort of trying to appeal to the people who are changing because of numbers.
Yeah.
Or they're panicking, or yes, eating too much fat, not enough protein. So if you eat a lot of fat, your satiety signals, you fall on fat, so you can't eat enough protein. So the protein leverage hypothesis is not absolutely proven, but it does seem to be consistent that your body is constantly trying to get enough protein in. That seems to be the ultimate thing it needs to satisfy you. So if you're on a lot of carbs, this sort of explains why people with type 2 diabetes or who are obese eat lots of carbs. But when you look at that person, they've got loads of carbs, right? Well, carbs are energy. Well, why aren't they energized? Well, they're not. They're sluggish, aren't they? Which doesn't make sense, because if you think, oh, carbs are instant energy, they should be like rockets because they've got loads, right? But that isn't the case. So we've got to stop looking at things in such a simplistic way. We've got to look at, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, what they're doing is they're trying to get enough protein. They haven't got enough protein, therefore they haven't got enough muscle mass, and they are overeating the carbohydrates. They've got a lot of body fat that they can't tap into because they've got high levels of insulin. So if someone came to me, I'd have to see what their situation is, the time they're eating, the amount they're eating. Yes, their macro split would be interesting. I would imagine most of them are bought into the very high fat, moderate or low protein way of eating. But I also think there are other things. So it could be the amount they're eating at one sitting. So if you're doing OMAD, that might not be sufficient. I think for women in the main, 3 meals a day is actually better for many different reasons. And this isn't a science channel. I won't get into that, but it just seems that women do better because they're eating less fat at that sitting. So the bile production is great. I had one person recently say to me that just adding ox bile in, they were quite a way into their journey, but they were still struggling a bit. So they added ox bile in, and they said it changed their life. They didn't add carbs in. So it's all about listening to the person and trying to work out. So we work that out from toilet habits, for instance. Yeah, there is enough fat going in, but you can't metabolize it. So it's not like a one size fits all, Courtney, and you know this. I mean, some people are very different to others, and how they eat is very different. The difference between lamb and beef, pork, bacon, whatever they're eating, it makes a big difference. But yeah, to give you a short answer, it could be the macro split. I think it also could be overhydration. I think that's a big thing. People drinking way too much water. So if their urine is clear, that would be the first thing I would say. Don't do that, because that's changing your electrolyte balance. Your urine needs to be straw colored. Drinking 8 glasses of water is pointless. Salmon is 72% water. A ribeye is over 70% water. You don't need to drink lots of water. And urine should be a waste product, should be straw colored. If you drink loads of water, water is not compressible. So I've got my sample here as well. If I drank that will enter my body's fluids, and it will enter into my plasma in my blood and will put my blood pressure up, right? So overeating is an interesting thing. Under eating, but over drinking is a really underestimated thing in this. So once you start drinking way too much water, you are messing up all your electrolyte balance, which will mess up your metabolism. And you could find that your body will start to try to eradicate the water, but then also you'll be putting salt in and electrolytes, which will retain water. So you're fighting your body all the time. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. And also even sparkling water. So if you've got carbonated water, that is carbon dioxide. You drink that. It has to be processed. Anything that goes into your body has to process. That becomes carbonic acid. And that is why some people get burps and, they feel bloated. They're literally feeding the bloat with this sparkling water that they thought was great. So there's so much nuance to it.
I drink regular water every day, but I also do have some bubblies. So is that you wouldn't recommend anyone drink bubbly water then?
Well, if they're doing fine in it, so we're going to go back to what we said at the beginning.
Yeah.
No problem. But if you come to me with bloated feelings or belching, and you're doing a lot of sparkling water, take that out first. Let's see if it's just that, because that's physiology. Nothing goes into your body and the body just goes, oh, hey, that's sparkling water. That's fine. That's Pellegrino. Well, that's like gold, it has to process it, and it becomes carbonic acid. And that's another thing about carbohydrates. Everyone talks about the acidity of your body. Carbs actually produce more acid than amino acids. Amino acids are fantastic for your pH because I'm trying not to get too sciencey, but amino acids can donate electrons or they can accept electrons. That basically keeps your acid base fine. Whereas glucose in the Krebs cycle produces carbon dioxide 4 times, and that hits the water in the system. We've got about 70% water, you've got about 50 to 60% water, and you will be making acid from your carbohydrate intake. So carbs are not your friend at all, because they glycate, they make you acidic, they increase your insulin, which will eventually switch off your fat burning. So I think if you look at adding carbs in because you're worried about your blood glucose, it's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And it might temporarily look good, but it's only because you're producing so much more insulin than you really want, to be honest.
Okay. No, this is actually, I feel like this is the talk I needed to hear because ever since, I don't even know when it was, June, July, when the sugar diet was popular, that's when
Oh, yeah.
things got planted in my head that maybe we shouldn't be carnivore because I'm listening to all these other opinions. And that's why I've been struggling to get back on track to carnivore because there's a doubt in my head because of people that used to be carnivore and they're saying, oh, don't be carnivore long term, this and that. But what you just explained makes so much sense that we're just looking at the wrong things. If they're so concerned about their glucose and you just explained why we shouldn't be concerned. So that actually I feel like this makes me feel so much better with all the doubts that I've been having because I'm clearly not thriving trying to add carbs back in. It's been an absolute disaster trying to get back to carnivore. Because the sugar addiction is just so strong, but also the self-doubt that I've been having about carnivore. So hearing all this just actually makes me feel better and feel more confident. Okay, I do need to get back to carnivore because that's what was working for me. This carb is not working for me at all. So thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. And it is about labels, isn't it? Because why is 100 the cutoff? Where's the science in that? Why is 100 milligrams per deciliter the cutoff? There's zero proof of that. And every time you exercise, it goes up. Every time you run, people don't seem to realize, but if you go out in the sun, your blood glucose will go up. So you heat up, it will go up. It's dynamic. It's absolutely dynamic, and it's got a reason to be there. I mean, I did an experiment where during that sugar diet thing, Cole Robinson was saying about Sean Baker, oh, he's never been in ketosis in his life, man. He's never been in ketosis. So I did a CGM experiment where I, every single day, did readings while I was eating a high protein diet, and my blood sugar was high, but so were my ketones. And it didn't push me out of ketosis. Sean doesn't measure. So, it's actually irrelevant, because I felt really great, but I wanted to prove. I do believe in the numbers. I've got an honours degree in physiology and health sciences, and basically that was looking at studies and looking at numbers, which are important for other people. I use numbers at the beginning, but in the end, someone could come in and say, no, my blood glucose is 55 milligrams per deciliter. Right. Well, that label is hypoglycemic. This is one person I'm actually thinking of. And she was out in the wood chopping down trees and stuff like that. But theoretically, with that number, with that label, I should have been saying to her, oh, quick, get in and get some fast-acting carbs down your neck. She operates at a very low level of blood glucose. And I have other people that are running at 115. I've got one guy, he's 55. He's the lightest he's been since he was 20, getting in jeans that, he'd kept from his band days. And he can get into them from when he was 20. He feels as fit as he's ever felt. He's got no addictions. He literally says to me, I am a completely different person. I can walk past restaurants. I can walk past Krispy Kreme, and there's not even, 1% of me wants to go there. Who am I? And that's the thing. I think we've got to look at the fact that all the numbers and all the labels are based on not us. They're based on people eating 45, 65% carbohydrates. I know I sound like a broken record, but the normative ranges are exactly that. They're normative. They're nothing to do with optimal, and they're nothing to do with me. They don't relate to me at all.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense that all the ranges are based off of people that are eating a standard American diet, or wherever you live, the standard diet that doesn't apply to us. And I think a lot of people are aware that these tests can be manipulated. Like, you can lower your cholesterol eating Oreos. And is that really the healthiest diet? No, but your
No.
cholesterol is lower. Like that doesn't really make sense. So just another example of how these ranges and these numbers are kind of BS in most cases.
Yep. Yeah. It's gaming the numbers. That's my phrase I'm using. Lowering your A1C by eating carbs is gaming it. You're actually making your red blood cells live less long. So it's an artifact of maths. You're not improving anything. How on earth, right? Just look at the logic. How on earth can eating more glucose lower glycation? It just physically cannot do that, because you're putting a bigger concentration of glucose into your body. And it's chemical bonding. Glycation is a chemical bond of glucose attaching to protein. If you want to look it up, it's the Schiff-based Maillard reaction. It's a known thing. Once it's done, it's done. You put that glucose in there, you are deranging your proteins. You're deranging your collagen, your albumin. You're deranging the proteins in your red blood cells, not just the hemoglobin. There's 4 structural proteins in the membrane. Well, you're buggering those up so it can't deform, so it dies sooner. It's ridiculous. But you look at the number and you think, that's great. I mean, I've got data from 15 years ago where we were measuring insulin, and we could predict exactly. And so we'd have people coming in, blood glucose was totally fine, and we were measuring insulin. Now, I was a bit wet behind the ears, and I didn't realize I could do this, make this connection, but I can now in hindsight. I could have said to probably 30% of the people at that time, do you know what? In 5 years, you're going to be diabetic if you don't do something. Just looking at their insulin, because it was so high, but their numbers were really great. So yeah, my blood glucose is great. They don't want to know about insulin. And the insulin wasn't a big thing 16 years ago. People didn't really understand it. And I was new, I was new to it. So I didn't push it. But the more I got into it, the more I realized it was really big. Then I got to age 50, went low carb, got into keto, then I went carnivore, and dealt with more and more diabetics that are doing this way of eating, and realizing that the A1C was the last thing on earth we needed to look at. It was all about the daily blood glucose, and it was all about the fructosamine test. Anyway, sorry.
No, I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you so much. I mean, I honestly feel so much better. And I think a lot of other people watching this that have had doubts lately too, because of all the different opinions out there, I think it's going to make a lot of people feel better on how to properly look at these numbers and just understand
Yeah.
how it all works.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
thank you.
one of the things I would say about T3 is that, you see, this is where it gets very scary for me, because one of the things that you have to investigate is mitochondrial function when T3 goes up. Because if T3 goes up, one of the things you need to look at is it because mitochondrial repair is going on? So is high levels of T3 great? I don't think so. I think appropriate levels of T3, which can actually be quite low, is the best thing. And like I say, so many other readings are not looked at. People that have low energy, maybe they're reverse T3, which many people don't get measured. They're not looking at that. So that sort of puts your brake on your metabolism. See, the thyroid is one of the things so misunderstood. It does what's called futile processing, metabolic processing. So most things in the body are either anabolic, building up, or catabolic, they build it down. The thyroid does both. And that's why it's the metabolic sort of adjudicator. So if it needs to ramp something up, it will, but it will also break things down at the same rate to try and level it up. So we need to actually understand that the thyroid is, or T3 in particular, is promoting gluconeogenesis. It could be promoting higher blood pressure, but at the same time, it could be doing things with your biochemistry, with your sodium, to bring down your blood pressure by changing your fluid balance. It's a fascinating organ, really. And I did have some illustrations to show how it worked. I don't think this is a place to do it. But when you understand exactly physically what happens in the cell and what T3 actually does, it becomes so easy to understand the numbers, and you stop worrying about the numbers because you realize actually what matters to the thyroid is what the body is telling it. So this is one of the rare moments where I say I do understand why doctors sometimes just look at TSH. I don't think that's a good thing, but I understand why, because TSH is an indicator. That's a thyroid stimulating hormone. It's nothing to do with the thyroid production. It's stimulating the thyroid from the pituitary gland, but that's coming from the hypothalamus, which is taking all the information in and saying, right, what does the thyroid need to do? There are so many good things that we could do with the thyroid panel, but understanding it in the context. So if your TSH is low, which it notoriously is on carnivore, what's that telling you? Well, that's telling you the peripheral tissues are saying, hey, this is really good. Whatever you're doing, we don't need to do much more because we're making the most of the hormones that you've produced. We don't have to ramp up production. I spoke to Dr. David Unwin about this. He's noticed that in his GP practice. TSH actually does go down lower the more carbohydrates you take out. Well, that makes sense as well. So I think that's sort of indicating that your overall metabolic system is working at such a great rate, because the boots on the ground are saying, yeah, it's really good here, it's really good in the eyes, that's great, we don't need more thyroid hormone, that's fantastic. So terrible analogy, but I was trying to not do it too sciencey. So I think bloods have a place, but you've got to understand how to interpret them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. Are you accepting new clients then? Like if someone wants to run their labs with you and have you analyze them, are you open to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. That I don't recommend a lab to get. People contact me, I'll say, well, where are you? Because obviously different people in the world, oh, well, these labs are good, LabCorp or whatever. I don't have an affiliate link deliberately, actually. So I'm not trying to make money out of people getting labs. In fact, I try to talk people out of them. If people approach me and say, what lab should I get? The first question I ask is, how are you feeling? And if they say, oh, it's the best I've ever felt, I'm like, well, don't bother. Unless you're a biohacker and you want the numbers, right? And you're that sort of person. But I do consults to go through the bloods and interpret them. And, it's so interesting because there's so many things you can do that to me are just so obvious. If we're going to stick on thyroid, maybe. So you can do what's called an iodine clearance test. You don't have to guess whether you're deficient in iodine. You can test. Well, not many people talk about it. Why don't they talk about it? I had one client where I was thinking, oh, should I take iodine? She was thinking, I don't know, should I? I said, well, why don't you do this test? And she'd never heard of it. And she'd had 20 years of thyroid problems. No one had ever suggested it. I got a text from the hospital and it just on WhatsApp. And she said, I'm definitely deficient in iodine. I said, wow, that test result was really quick. And she messaged back, no, they gave me the tablet of iodine. And within 30 minutes, it's the best I felt in my entire life. So how that works is you're given a tablet which let's just make the maths really easy, and you have 100 units of iodine in it. So you take the tablet, it dissolves, it gets into your system, and then they measure your urine over 24 hours. And if over 24 hours, the first collection has 20 units of iodine, the next one has 20, the next one has 20, the next one has 20, the next one has 20. Over 24 hours, you've excreted out 100 units of iodine. You're not deficient because your body doesn't need it. Your body is saying, so there's some other thing. It's a nailed on test. It's a really good test. No one talks about it.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Okay, that's interesting.
So you could categorically know whether you need it or not. Yes, you can rub it on your arm, see if it evaporates and all that, but you can do the iodine clearance test and you can be told categorically, pretty much categorically. I think there's like a 3% error. It's one of those few things that are really nailed on because your body is so good at excreting it, which is why so many people recommend just taking it because it doesn't matter. Your body will excrete it out. But that doesn't get to the nub of the problem, because if your body is excreting it out and you still don't feel great, you haven't got to, well, it's not iodine, is it? That's not the problem. So you're taking iodine, not getting the result because you're shooting in the dark. If you do the iodine clearance test and it's great, you don't need iodine, right? What is it? Is it T2 maybe? Is it reverse T3? So understanding the whole nuance and the whole physiology of every single lab, when people get thyroid panel, and I'm like, well, you need more than that, because thyroid doesn't work in isolation. In fact, the more biomarkers you can get, the better, because you could have a problem in your liver, which has a knock-on effect on the thyroid, or on the kidney, which has a knock-on effect on the thyroid, or vice versa. So, yeah, I do see people, I do make it as easy to understand as possible. This is why I have these silly little props as well, because if people don't want to get into the science, my little pictures here, I've got my white blood cells here. So, how you get the blood. It's an interesting thing to do. But one of the things I think that's been helpful for me is when I started, I never said, oh, right, okay, so the level needs to be 2 to 20. I'd be like, well, how do we get that level? How do we measure that? Why is C-peptide? Why is that a good thing for insulin? So when I started, I wanted to know everything. And then you can reverse engineer it, because when people start coming in, you're like, right, okay, well, that makes sense. That's why they're yellow. That's why they look terrible. Or, that's why they're underweight, because you've got those metrics. And then when I did the honours degree in physiology and health sciences, it just all sort of meshed together. And then I did the obesity and diabetes specialist practitioner qualification. And it was just great to have all those things come in together and deal with real people. So this was way before the restrictions. And then as I went more and more into it, reading the articles and the literature, you realize that it's full of misinformation. Nutrition science isn't very sciencey, really. So clinical experience and what you see in a person is the most telling thing. And most people that run carnivore, they look healthy. When you add carbs in, yeah, they might lose a bit of weight. They might look at their numbers and feel great. I think in the long run, they're going to regret it. It's going to trigger the addiction, which you just said. I couldn't do it. I tell you, trigger my addiction. If people like Sean Baker, he's publicly said, if cheesecake was healthy, I'd eat it. But it's not. So we've got to be realistic. Those foods they're manipulated, aren't they? The ultra processed foods. They have scientists designed to make you addicted. So, and where are you going to get your carbs from? And what if you get it from fruit? Then you've got the problem with fructose. So in Britain, I managed to get the food growers inside track. I was doing a video about fruit and veg, and I wanted it to be impartial. So I approached the food growers, and I managed to get the PDFs of the Apple Growers Association, the Pear Growers Association, and I was shocked what I read, because most apples in our supermarket were picked over a year ago, and they go into this controlled environment. And even the PDF, it actually says after 6 weeks, all the nutrients are pretty much depleted. So your fruit and veg that's fresh, your apple that's fresh on that shelf is not fresh. It's over a year old. And it has no nutrients left because it's been in a controlled environment for a year. So is that where you're going to get your nutrients from? And you're going to get a big lump of fructose, which is metabolized through your small intestine, also hits your liver. And we get into the fact that fructose is glycating. That word comes up again. And it's 11 times more glycating than glucose. So that's pretty dangerous. And the liver knows that. So it gets fructose and it adds a phosphate on it. So you've heard of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Well, the liver has to donate its energy supply to stop fructose being glycating. It makes a thing called fructose 1-phosphate. So what your liver ends up doing, because your liver needs energy, it ends up having a concentration of ATP plummeting because you've eaten fructose. And that's partly why fructose is so damaging, because your liver can't operate with less energy. The posh term is your ATP concentration will decrease when you eat fructose, because it's protecting you from glycation, because glycation is about the worst thing you can have in your body. So I'm not going to put any glucose into my body or any fructose, because I don't want that. I don't want permanent damage to my proteins.
Okay. And now that makes me, and I've thought about this before, but that makes me second guess giving my kids fruit, because they eat essentially like meat and fruit. And I worry about that sometimes, if that's not the right thing to be doing, but just giving them only meat would be challenging.
Yeah, but I mean, are they doing okay with the fruit?
I think they're thriving.
Okay, well, you keep the fruit in.
Yeah. I just don't want to cause any damage, but
Well, I mean, you can monitor it, can't you? You can
yeah.
look at how they're growing. You can look at their sleep. You can look at their anxiety, their levels of activity. like I say, you look at Paul Saladino, I didn't say he shouldn't eat fruit.
Yeah.
I said he does 4 hours of surfing, so he probably gets away with it.
Yeah.
So it's all about the situation. If you said, look, one of my kids, he's eating a ton of fruit and really overweight, it doesn't get out of bed, I'm like, okay, maybe stop the fruit.
Yeah, no, it's the opposite.
Well,
It's
there you
like
go.
they are
So
maniacs,
yeah.
like very energetic, athletic, like they're doing amazing. So I guess it's working okay.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, one of the things that I quite big on is sodas, right? So if you get a can of Coke, for instance, nobody really thinks like this. I think I'm a bit sad. I think about things like this, but so a can of Coke is 9 teaspoons of sugar, and I've got 5 liters of blood. Right, you've got about 4 liters of blood because you're quite tiddly pop, aren't you? You're quite small, yeah. So you got about 4 liters of blood, right? And your kid's probably got 3 liters of blood. And I have a can of Coke, you have a can of Coke, and one of your kids has a can of Coke. The sugar concentration for your child is nearly twice as much as mine because I've got 9 teaspoons in 5 liters. They've got 9 teaspoons in 3 liters. So their sugar concentration goes through the roof. And we wonder why kids are hyperactive. So we're not looking at that as well. In the old days, you wouldn't give your kids the same servings of anything sugary because you'd have a kid's portion, but we don't do that anymore. So we've got to look at that as well. And if your child is doing well with a little bit of fruit, then keep it in there. Absolutely, just
Okay.
keep an eye on it.
That makes me feel better. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for answering all this. I feel like it was super helpful. I appreciate you breaking down the science for people like me to understand what's going on. So let everyone know where they can find you and like what coaching services you offer.
Well, I think you could look at Coach Stephen on YouTube, where I do a weekly live Q&A, which is every week, Sunday, 7 p.m. UK time, state controlled Britain. That's where we do it from. My Substack is a free thing that you can subscribe to at the ukcarnivore.substack.com. And all of this stuff that I've just said, every single day you'll get something that does the science, but does it with analogies and simple, diagrams and makes it easy to understand. I also do Instagram, UK Carnivore as well. But I think the easiest thing to do is to just go on my website, theukcarnivore.com, and all my services are there. Yes, I do consults. I'm always happy to talk to people, happy to do success stories. I've got over 1,000 success stories under my belt already. So people that reverse type 2 diabetes, very common, reversing kidney disease, kidney function returning, MS, so many things, CAC score being reduced. So yeah, there's loads of ways to find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That's okay. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. All right. We'll see you soon.